Hi, I'm Malicious. Welcome back to my channel where we discuss gaming and most MMORPG stuff. This week I wanted to talk about the latest closed beta test of Elyon, which I played and streamed over on my Twitch channel, link in the description to that down below. I'm excited to talk about Elyon and what I found in the beta itself. Let me start by saying I played every aspect of the game I could before forming an opinion: PvP, PvE, life skilling, and lots more content. Whatever was available to me at the time. I've also compiled some more data and things we know about the game on the Korean side as well, without making it much more overly in-depth on every system. So without much further ado, let us get into that. I want to get monetization and pay to win out of the way first, since it's the question most people have. Let me start this by saying that the game is indeed pay to win. Just like every Korean MMORPG, it is pay to win, so no misconceptions here there on that one. How much that pay to win aspect affects you is your own choice, and between you, your bank, and your conscience, honestly. Now that that is out of the way, the game is buy to play. That's the first thing we need to list off right off the bat. I'll now list off everything I've seen or know of personally that can give you an edge on the Korean version of the game, and I want to make sure that we all know that the NA/EU cash shop will be different to the Korean cash shop. Once I know everything available in the NA and EU cash shop, I'll let you know as well, but they did make sure that we are supposed to know that it will be different. Now, there is a Luminous system which can be compared to Black Desert Online's Fairy, but it gives stats and rune skill points which matter later in the game a lot more than in the earlier parts of the game, as well as the gacha game aspect of it that can be pay to win, since you need less runes to reach certain thresholds and effects if you have a Luminous that is maxed out with the exact Luminous that you would want it to be, which gives you a bigger advantage in the long run. Anybody who rushes this early and pays to win it will have a tiny amount of gain, but the gain gets stronger towards the end game when the aspects of the game that involve the rune system and those higher unlocks become more difficult to reach with just the runes themselves. Additionally, there is a subscription model in-game you can pay for that gives you bonuses in-game, like a value pack in Black Desert Online, for example. There is also a currency which looks like a gear or cog that can be used on Luminous and other things, which are really worthwhile and good. You can also buy and sell the same currency to other players. Now, the difference is about 100 USD is worth about 5 to 10 hours of grinding to match that, depending on your class and gear, which would also mean that about $300 swiped is 15 to 30 hours of grinding. It adds up and makes a difference. You're not guaranteed a win or a loss through this, however, but it is a method of pay to win. It's worth mentioning, but do with that information what you will. The casual swiper won't be an issue. The whales probably will become a bigger issue in the long run, especially if they swipe, grind, and actually learn how to play the game, so the skill cap isn't necessarily missing. That way, catching up will always be something you need to do. Not saying you can't outskill or outwork them, but things will become much harder at times due to just how much one is willing to spend and how much hours they're willing to put into the game while also spending at the same time. Now, we've seen this happen before. It can be very problematic, but once again, they did say the NA/EU cash shop will be different, and if it is different to this, I will keep you informed, but until then, you have all the information that I know. So if you watched my previous video about Elyon, you would know that I called the game a spiritual successor of TERA. I was right and wrong at the same time. The further I got into the game, the more similarities I saw of TERA. Some of the mobs seemed really familiar, even some of the sounds, the bosses, and so on. Not entirely one-to-one copies, but it seemed like some of the art and moves were indeed recycled. Definitely not all of them. Now, this, in my opinion, is a good thing. If it isn't broken, then don't fix it. Rather, improve on it. And I think they did that with some of the bosses and the mobs for sure. Of course, a random bear mob that looks very much like the same version that was on TERA, and parts of it is fine. I don't see any negatives there, but the game felt eerily similar in some regards. But Elyon did indeed have some massive improvements. Some of the dungeons were a real joy to be a part of and reminded me of TERA, and a bunch of other things that you ex-TERA players or current TERA players or anybody that wanted to try out TERA and thought it was too late, you're now on equal footing with Elyon if you choose to play the game. If I had to describe Elyon in one saying, I'd call it quality of life changes the game. The reasons for this are as follows. Many of the issues we have with current MMORPGs, like the Y and Z axis combat being stiff or buggy, or for instance in Black Desert Online, where you try to fight somebody on uneven terrain, it becomes a nightmare. These things don't really exist in Elyon at the moment from my experience. I've fought people on hills, I've aimed my abilities up and hit them diagonally and all of that in general. Another thing is, while the autopath isn't perfect, it does let you go from the location that you need to go to the other location at maximum speed. Now this doesn't matter whether you are on a mount or if you are on foot. It will activate the sprint every time you use it, every time you have enough stamina. You still get caught on things, and that's fine. You know, I'd like to see the autopath also improved in the future. There's also a lot more improvements I've seen, like making grinding mobs more interesting by having them in PvP regions, as well as the mobs having enrage mechanics, which is pretty cool also. And there is also a built-in DPS meter on bosses. It's truly mind-blowing how much we get from mods and how much we complain about things, yet in Elyon they are just there, including the lack of gender locking classes. It's open and it's refreshing to see these kinds of changes and improvements in the MMORPG world. They didn't just focus on the big picture, but they genuinely considered the small things that we complain about day in and day out in other games or use mods for, and for that I praise them. Let me know your personal thoughts about the quality of life changes, the small things and the big things in the comments, by the way. I'll be reading those, of course. Now, the combat in general, at least from my experience as an assassin, was quite fun indeed. I want to start by saying that the combat is action combat, which means that you do aim your skills. However, some of the abilities on certain classes do have some lock-on abilities you need to mouse over, so it's a slight hybrid between the complete action combat, just like TERA was. As an assassin, it was relatively fast-paced. You could compare the combat to Blade and Soul and TERA mixed together almost. Not really comparable to BDO anymore after playing it. Some skills and movements felt a little sluggish or clunky, like where you auto attacks. Some of them would make you move in a different direction and other small things, but it's definitely make the combat feel a lot more methodical and skill-based, with more ways to outplay an opponent and get the perfect dodges and stuff out. Everyone has their own CC break that has a cooldown as well as their own dodges, and there's a whole tree that works on expanding things and making sure your playstyle is unique to you. Also, while in combat, you do move slower, which would make sense since everybody has free dodges based off of their stamina and stuff like that. But once again, it will come down to the people playing whether or not you like the combat, the slow movement during stuff, well, when it's without skills that make you move or dodges. Whether that will be a good or a bad thing, that's kind of down to you. It's not overbearing, but it's there. It does seem like gear is a very big part of the game in general as well, but skill does not go missing here at all. It's not a shallow system. You can be geared and yet still do terribly, or vice versa. Yet you will probably still meet people with a vastly higher gear score at times, which will result in you feeling like you're just hitting them with a wet noodle, and that's just part of the game as well, so gear does still carry to a degree. So it's a combination of skill and gear from what I can tell, just off of the first real tester anyway of the game myself. I'll try to do something more in depth for the closed beta 2, for instance, seeing just how much gear score some people can have and how much I can do to them and so on and so forth in that same degree. The game does apparently have balance patches quite frequently as well, which is a good thing, but I won't say it's perfect since it's down to the developers themselves to make sure that the balance is upheld and that we all have a game or two in mind that even though there are balance changes that are frequent, they were not really the right ones, and some classes remain overtuned in many games in general. That one will be an interesting one to tackle for sure for the developers, and I hope to see good things. Now, don't even get me started on the skill system itself. As I said before, you have a limited number of skills you can use on your bar, and you can augment them. There's a whole system built into the game that lets you do that, and this isn't going to be one of those MMORPGs where you can just use all of your skills and get them all on 3 different bars or whatever and just smash out all your buttons at the same time. This will definitely be a way to build based off of what you want. I've seen ranged assassins that focus entirely on ranged skills, and I've seen melee assassins that focus entirely on melee skills. I've seen sort of hybrids in between as well. I've seen a lot going on for the game, and I really find it interesting to look at and enjoy myself personally. I'm satisfied with this kind of system where I'm allowed to pick my skills because I played games like Guild Wars 2, ESO, and Guild Wars 1 before that. I know how to put certain skills on my bar and make a build I enjoy, and I genuinely love that about the game. And with all of these options available to us, though, I have to wonder just how much of it can really be balanced. I'd love to see a lot of these options being viable in many aspects of the game, and not just a stale meta where everybody follows the same build that was posted online, even if it is the best one to use. Giving us more options to use and look at and change on our playstyle, on what we want to do, is usually the best way, rather than having so many of them that are just deducted and deleted from the game essentially by being vastly inferior to a superior build. I think that would be an absolute crime, and something that already happens quite frequently in many different games. So if Krafton is listening to this, stand out, be one of the few games that gives us a lot of variety and keeps that variety going strong rather than letting it dissolve into a stale meta. The systems in Elyon really are a giant web. Sometimes it can feel overwhelming to figure out that some gear can break on enhancement failures and some cannot. Yet you can only equip 1 or 2 or 3 of these pieces that can break based on your level. They're called breakthrough gear. Then there's the whole capped enhancement system, as well as upgrading, enhancing, enchanting, those little crystal rune slots, and the effects that they provide, the mana awakening system, the skill augmentation system. It really does give you a lot to learn and play around with, to figure out what is best and what you find best and how you want to play, and a lot more. This obviously means that there's going to be better ways to run PvP gear and PvE gear. Of course, there is the randomized stats also. There's a good chunk of RNG involved in all of this. None of it is really mind-blowingly low chances though, as of yet, from what I've seen anyway, and I think it gives the theory crafters and people that like to experiment room to mess and improve with things. I could go into further detail here if requested further down the line, but I wanted to keep this intricate web of systems as simple as possible and just say yes, it is here, it's interesting in its own way, and allows players to build completely differently than one would expect in many other games. Now, we've seen this with games like ESO, that they have their own like system tree and a bunch of other things, and we've seen it in Guild Wars, but we haven't seen a lot of systems all in one trying to combine together to make this giant web. I mean, we have in some, and in others we've seen barely anything. Now Elyon does have that, and I find that really cool. Let's talk about the PvE for a minute here. The game definitely has a bunch of dungeons ranging from 1-man dungeons to 5-man dungeons, and they are quite interesting and fun in my opinion. In these dungeons is where the DPS meter that tends to pop up, but only for the boss damage. There's mechanics, and it's not just a pure beatdown. Some of them are frustrating to do, and some of the solo dungeons genuinely require you to get good to actually do them. I love that about the game, and I'm excited to see what the later endgame dungeons will also be like. Now, a thing to mention is that the game is Korean, and with Korean games usually comes a lot of grinding, and this holds true for this game also. At a certain point, you actually need to grind mobs after doing the dailies and the side missions simply to progress onto the next region or the next phase of the main story. I don't know if that's how it will be live, since they said this is an older build of the game and all that localization is what they are focusing on and messing with at the moment, but currently the game requires you to grind some for sure. Some will find this tedious and would rather more story and quests to take them to the next region and skip the grind. Let me know what your perspective is on this and why in the comments. I'm going to try and gather as much feedback as I can from guildies, players, and viewers in general, and try to get those opinions sent over to the devs of the game if I can, so please help me do that by dropping a comment. I personally don't mind the grind. A few quests and some interesting mobs to grind has always been part of the games I play, and as I said, with the enrage mechanic and the ability to PvP at any time and other small systems, and just how enjoyable the combat is, like becoming a demon as well, that other small system where you gain more experience but become hostile to all players in the area, is a fun addition to the game, I will say. There's also world events that do happen that teleport you to doing a world boss or a fishing challenge or something that keeps things fresh and interesting, and you get rewarded for your efforts and then teleported right back to the spot you were at the beginning, which honestly breaks up the grinding and once again plays into the quality of life thing. I absolutely love this kind of thing. I just click a button, do the event, and when it's over, right back onto my grinding spot. No need to run around the entire map the whole time. Of course, there are bosses out in the wild that you will also need to do as well, but from the perspective of just world events, it's really good. When it comes to PvP, this is basically an undeniably huge part of the game. It's unavoidable and easy to get into. I did everything I could PvP wise, dimensional rifts, clan wars, arenas, open world, and a lot of it. Honestly, I had so much fun doing it, and it was generally just a great experience. Sometimes it's large blob fights, but there's also skirmishes and stuff on the sides, and dying isn't really a huge deal. You can get right back into the action in most of those PvP arenas or PvP open world areas, especially like Dimensional Rift and such. From the perspective of the arenas, it's also super fun. I managed to pull off a 3v1 against people with similar gear because I had played my cards right there, and it was honestly one of the best and most exciting moments I've had in an MMORPG in a long time, and I absolutely loved it. PvP is basically everywhere in the beta, and the events to fight over certain things as well, including the clan wars and realm wars and such, really quite a delight to be a part of. There are some parts that could use some fixing for sure, certain damage numbers from ballistas, cannons, or certain NPC outposts and such that we had to fight over as well in some of the PvP of the game, but overall I think the PvP was a really enjoyable experience for me. Absolutely loved all of it, and having a strong backbone for a guild and working together was great also. So some solo players will likely get left out of some of the PvP when it comes down to some portion of the game in general, that part of the system at least, when we're talking clan wars specifically and a few other things. However, in other areas of the game like arenas and dimensional rifts and such, any player can really join, whether you're solo or not, and do what you need to do and still get some enjoyment out of the PvP. I do, however, recommend getting into a strong guild for parts of it, and the faction system, where it's the Ontari versus Vulpin, really takes the spotlight in many of these PvP battles. Not all, but a big amount of them. Either way, it's a lot of content for the PvPers for sure, and a lot of fun to get stuck into. I do believe PvP will continue to have a huge part in the game in general. PvE is not neglected in any sense of the term either, so don't worry about that. But there is a heavy focus on PvP, and everything you do in the game rewards you, PvP, PvE, or otherwise. I don't think you make as much money or as much resources from PvP as you would from, for example, grinding, but there's still a lot of tokens and currencies and other things that you can get in some areas better than in others. You can also use these rewards for other enhancement materials and a lot of other rewards down the line. Now to discuss life skilling. It's not necessarily the most interesting or innovative system that I've seen so far, but it's relatively calm and it's tame, and you can't exactly tell where all the nodes are for mining and other gathering are yet, but you do get houses both instanced and out in the world if you choose to purchase a more expensive house, and you can craft gear and potions and many other things. It will probably progress and have a lot of different things to make in the future, and it will likely be a really good source of money as well, but when it comes to comparing life skilling, for example, and crafting to in Elyon to games like Arcade, it's night and and day. Arcade, for example, still has the best fishing system I have ever seen in an MMORPG, and many other crafting systems that Elyon doesn't really compare to as of yet. I have yet to explore all of it and will update you as I keep looking further into that. But as I said, not every game will appeal and not every system in the game will appeal to that degree. There's also many other things in the game, including treasure hunting, the little luminous thing that can give you, buffs and boosts, and the luminous battles for AFK experience and money and these items as well, and so much more small things that do tie into life skilling and make the game genuinely a lot more interesting and have a lot more content and systems for players to explore and hours to put into the game. So it's definitely not a shallow shell of an MMORPG, and it has some real depth behind it. The issues will come with time to see if all the PvP dailies and many other systems can really hold up well in the end game, because without seeing the end game loop, one never truly gets to see the full essence of the MMORPG. What do I have to fight for at the end of the road, sort of thing. And that will definitely be important to me and important to many other players, but I don't think I found anything super alarming in the game as of yet, apart from the actual ability to be so pay to win to a degree that I expected it not to be. But again, that will probably be something that will be dealt with when the NA-EU cash shop becomes more clear to us in the future. In conclusion, I personally enjoyed the Elyon beta a lot more than I expected myself to. I came in with low expectations since I've been let down by many MMORPGs in the past, but I genuinely saw the beauty and the changes in the game that show that Korean MMORPGs can indeed appeal to many Western players, even get a bigger reach than before, with gender locking gone, newer races, a good style of game, airships flying, events, PvP and PvE combinations, great scenery and graphics for a game made on Unreal Engine 3, and all the quality of life changes we talked about, including being able to PvP on uneven terrain being a big one, interesting new systems that were a lot of fun, and generally a lot of content to wade through. Elyon really does seem like it's going to be a strong contender in the MMORPG world, at least in the coming future. I've spoken to some other players who play games like World of Warcraft or Black Desert Online, and some of them are absolutely ready to quit those games and pursue greener pastures in Elyon. Although this game will not be revolutionary in any sense and won't exactly break any barriers in the MMORPG world, it has its issues with things like being on Unreal Engine 3, so there are some parts that are limited, small cliffs or walls that you can't grip onto or climb over that's engine based. RNG could be a big one for some people that bothers them, and as well as the cash shop that has elements of pay to win. In my opinion, it's not the biggest deal, but only if the cash shop we have on NA and EU is much different. And once again, they did say that they were officially going to change the cash shop and that it will be different, so I'm looking to see what those changes will be. If it's less pay to win than Black Desert Online, for example, and some people do still argue that, but I personally don't see a viable reason to have the game be buy to play and have this many elements that could dissolve into pay to win fiestas with no real limitations or anything, and a other small few other things. PvP, for example, being a big thing that everywhere might be a big fight, or that might be a turnoff for some PvE oriented players. The game itself has a huge package of things to do and deal with, and being buy to play with the ability to have a subscription also within the game, it could end up being a money and a time sink for sure. I think this game might actually do really well in the West, but it still depends on the end game loop and how interesting and fun it could be. Honestly, that's going to be what makes or breaks the game, at least for me. Having this much content to work with is amazing, but only if it really carries to the end game and stays fun and relevant. That would be making it better than it was to begin with. Both PvP and PvE in the game itself kept me really interested and engaged. In my downtime, I was tired of grinding or something, I would tend to my life skills. World events really mixed things up. Doing bosses in groups was also quite fun for the first few times I did do that. Clan Wars was exceptionally fun PvP content, and it was really engaging. but I really want to see more before I make a complete analysis on the game. I loved almost all aspects of it that I was involved in, and some parts didn't really feel insane, but they weren't things that I would be like, oh, this is horrible. Life skilling, for example, wasn't really the best thing I've ever seen, but it wasn't the worst thing I've seen either. The question is how much of that really comes down to the new, fresh, shiny MMORPG to explore feeling, and how long till that honeymoon period wears off. Any MMORPG player knows how much of a mess this can be. You find a game, you play it, you love the beginning, then you get to end game and you say, what now? I should also mention that since it's a Korean MMORPG, it will be grindy at times, and there will be times where players who care about lore and story will likely be let down. But as a game right now, just from the closed beta experience, I'm on Team Elyon, at least for now. Loved so much of it, and I know it wouldn't appeal to everybody, but from someone who loves customization and many systems to mess with, great graphics, the love of PvP, PvE, and generally a person who enjoys all aspects of an MMO that allow me to do things that I think I really want to do. I really do enjoy the game thus far, a lot more than I expected. I could definitely see myself making more content on Elyon and streaming it in the future, but stay tuned for closed beta 2 video once we're able to play that again, and we'll address any issues we see there and try to keep you up to date on the cash shop and if anything changes there at all, or if in reality we will have the same as the Korean version. They said they would change it, and I'm willing to wait for that, but I personally will not be willing to play another game that I found really enjoyable that gets absolutely ruined by pay to win and horrible dailies. And I'm looking at Arcade directly when I say that, with conviction. Now that we've come to an end, I'd like to thank you for watching the video, and please feel free to hit the subscription button, notification bell, like and comment on the video. No pressure, any of the above. But I am a small channel, so everything really helps. If you guys want to unlock my giveaway in the future, please hit up my Twitter and give me a follow there. Links to that will be in the description down below. If you want to discuss things, there's a Discord link and a Twitch link for those of you that want to hop in and just vibe with me while I'm streaming, which I should be doing a lot more of in the near future. So I'd love to see you there and build a community together. Let me know about your Elyon experience. I'm gathering feedback and I'm interested in your opinions so that we can make this game something special. But as always, I've been Malicious, and this has been a pleasure.